Park visitor Jacob Wilson attacked by aggressive bear. In the heart of the rugged Teton wilderness, Jacob Wilson stood perched on a rocky outcropping, binoculars pressed to his weathered face. The sun climbed over the jagged peaks, bathing the valley in a golden glow. A seasoned park ranger and passionate wildlife advocate, Jacob had devoted his life to teaching others about the importance of respecting nature's delicate balance. He spotted movement on the valley floor, a grizzly sow and her 2 cubs lumbering through the tall grass. Jacob smiled, marveling at their untamed beauty, but his reverie was interrupted by the crackle of his radio. "Jacob, you there? We've got a situation at the South Trailhead. That pompous businessman Grant Leland just showed up with his entourage, making a ruckus about some exclusive tour he supposedly booked. Can you head over and sort this out? He's already scaring off the wildlife." Jacob sighed, frustration etching his brow. Grant Leland. The name alone made his blood pressure spike. A wealthy thrill-seeker with a bloated sense of entitlement, Grant was notorious for his reckless antics in the park, harassing animals, venturing off-trail, disregarding safety protocols. He treated the wilderness like his personal playground, putting himself and others at risk. "Roger that. I'm on my way," Jacob replied tersely. He stowed his binoculars and began descending the ridge, steeling himself for the confrontation to come. Grant may have money and influence, but out here, in the untamed heart of the Tetons, respect for nature's power reigned supreme. And Jacob would ensure that lesson was learned, one way or another. The ride to the trailhead was a blur of clenched jaws and white knuckles. As Jacob parked his Jeep, he spotted Grant's garish entourage, a parade of designer outdoor gear and arrogant smirks. Grant stood at the center, decked out in flashy apparel better suited for a fashion runway than a backcountry trek. Well, if it isn't the great and powerful park ranger, come to grant us peasants access to his precious wilderness. Grant sneered as Jacob approached. His cronies snickered. Jacob bit back a retort, determined to remain professional. "Mr. Leland, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This area of the park is off-limits to commercial tours, and for good reason. The wildlife here is particularly sensitive to human disturbance." Grant scoffed. "Sensitive? They're just dumb beasts, and I didn't drop a small fortune to be told where I can and can't go. I'm here for the real wilderness experience, and I intend to get it." "Sir, I must insist," Jacob began, but Grant cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Enough. I didn't come here for a lecture. Boys, grab your gear. We're heading out." Grant shouldered his pack, a gleam of defiance in his eyes. Jacob's hand twitched toward his radio, an alert poised on his lips. But he hesitated. Escalating the situation would only make matters worse. Better to keep a close eye on Leland's group, ready to intervene if necessary. With a heavy heart, he watched them march down the trail, a sense of foreboding twisting in his gut. In the untamed wilderness, arrogance could be a deadly vice. And Grant Leland was marching headlong into nature's unforgiving arms. As Grant's group trekked deeper into the backcountry, Jacob followed at a discreet distance, his senses on high alert. The air hung heavy with tension, like an incoming storm. He cringed as the men shouted and laughed raucously, their voices carrying through the tranquil forest. Didn't they understand the importance of treading lightly, of respecting the fauna's habitat? Apparently not, judging by the trail of litter and trampled vegetation they left in their wake. Suddenly, a flash of brown caught Jacob's eye. He froze, pulse quickening. There, on the path ahead, a massive grizzly bear, hackles raised and eyes glinting with wild intensity. Grant and his men stumbled to a halt, faces slack with shock and fear. Time seemed to slow as the bear regarded them, its low growl resonating through the clearing. Jacob held his breath, silently urging the group to back away slowly, to show deference to the mighty creature. But Grant, in a moment of unchecked bravado, did the unthinkable. Reaching into his pack, he pulled out a candy bar and waved it tauntingly at the bear. "Here, boy, want a little treat?" he jeered. Jacob's heart plummeted. "No," he yelled, but it was too late. As if in slow motion, Grant lobbed the candy bar at the bear's feet. The wrapper glinted in the dappled sunlight. The bear's nostrils flared, its eyes locking onto the foreign object. With a roar that shook the leaves from the trees, it charged. Chaos erupted. Grant's men scattered like frightened rabbits, their screams echoing through the forest. But Grant stood rooted to the spot, his arrogance giving way to primal terror as the bear bore down upon him. Without thinking, Jacob sprinted forward, placing himself between Grant and 800 pounds of furious grizzly. He knew the risks, but he couldn't let the man die, no matter how reckless and foolhardy he'd been. In a heartbeat, the bear was upon them. Jacob felt the hot blast of its breath, saw the glint of its terrible claws. He braced for the impact, a silent apology to the wild flickering through his mind. Then the world went black. Pain. Searing, all-consuming pain. It was the first thing Jacob registered as he clawed his way back to consciousness. His body felt like it had been through a meat grinder, every nerve ending screaming in protest. Blinking blearily, he tried to make sense of his surroundings. Towering trees swayed overhead, their leaves rustling in the breeze. The air smelled of earth and copper. He was lying on his back, limbs splayed awkwardly on the forest floor. Memory came rushing back like a flood. The bear, Grant's idiocy, his own foolish, instinctive lunge. He'd gotten between a charging grizzly and its target. It was a miracle he was still breathing. Gingerly, Jacob tried to sit up, only to collapse back with a strangled cry. White-hot agony lanced through his chest and left arm. Glancing down, he blanched. His shirt was in tatters, the fabric soaked crimson. Deep claw marks gouged his flesh, weeping blood. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to assess the damage. The gashes were deep and ragged, but miraculously seemed to have missed anything vital. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, and his head pounded like a jackhammer, vision blurring in and out of focus. A concussion, most likely, but he was alive. That fact hit him like a freight train. He'd stared down death incarnate, and somehow survived. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in his throat, only to transform into a gasping sob. Reality crashed over him in icy waves. He was alone, badly wounded, miles from help. Grant and his men were nowhere to be seen, having fled in terror. And the bear, Jacob shuddered, scanning the trees with growing dread, could still be out there, watching, waiting. He had to move to find shelter and tend to his wounds as best he could. One agonizing inch at a time, he dragged himself to his feet, swaying like a sapling in a gale. Each breath was a battle, each step a Herculean feat. But he was a survivor, forged in the crucible of the wild. He would not let this break him. Jaw clenched against the pain, Jacob began to limp deeper into the forest, a trail of blood marking his passage. In the untamed heart of the Tetons, the line between life and death was a razor's edge, and he would walk it to whatever end awaited. Miles away, in a small cabin nestled in a hidden valley, Hannah Clark sat hunched over a microscope, studying samples of bear scat. As a wildlife biologist and conservation specialist, her life revolved around understanding and protecting the delicate ecosystems of the Tetons. A sudden pounding at the door startled her from her work. Frowning, she glanced at the clock. Who could possibly be calling at this hour, in this remote location? Cautiously, she made her way to the door and peered through the peephole. Her eyes widened. On her porch stood a man, his clothes torn and bloody, face ashen with pain and exhaustion. He swayed precariously, one hand braced against the doorframe for support. In a heartbeat, Hannah flung the door open. The man nearly tumbled into her arms, a low moan escaping his lips. "Please," he rasped out. "I need help." Hannah's instincts kicked into overdrive. Half carrying, half dragging the injured stranger, she maneuvered him to the couch, mind racing. His wounds were severe, deep lacerations, a badly broken arm, clear signs of head trauma. What on earth had happened to him? Grabbing her extensive first aid kit, Hannah set to work, cleaning and bandaging the gashes, splinting the broken limb, checking his pupils for concussion. All the while, Her patient drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently. As she worked, snippets of his ramblings began to coalesce into a chilling picture. A reckless group, led by a man named Grant Leland, harassing the wildlife, taunting a bear, a foolish, heroic attempt to intervene. Then, attack and abandonment. Hannah's blood boiled with righteous anger. She knew of Leland, had heard whispers of his arrogant disregard for the park's rules and wildlife, and now it seemed his actions had nearly cost a man his life. But there would be time for that later. Now, her focus had to be on saving her unexpected patient. As she finished tending to his wounds, Hannah settled in for a long vigil, determined to see him through the night. In the flickering candlelight, two strangers, one broken and battered, the other strong and compassionate, began to forge a bond born of shared purpose and unspoken understanding. In the face of reckless destruction, they would stand as guardians of the wild, united in their fight for justice and conservation. The seeds of change, planted in the soil of adversity, began to take tenuous root. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. Jacob stirred, consciousness returning in fits and starts. He was warm, his pain dulled to a manageable ache. Confused, he blinked open gritty eyes, taking in his unfamiliar surroundings. "Easy there," a voice murmured. "You've been through quite an ordeal." Jacob turned his head, wincing at the stiffness in his neck. A woman sat in a nearby armchair, watching him with concern etched on her delicate features. Auburn hair fell in waves around her shoulders, framing intelligent green eyes. "Where am I?" he croaked, throat dry as sandpaper. "Who are you?" "I'm Hannah," the woman replied, offering him a glass of water. "Hannah Clark. You stumbled onto my porch last night, pretty badly banged up. I'm a wildlife biologist, been living out here for years studying the ecosystems. How are you feeling?" Jacob took a grateful sip, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. "Like I went 10 rounds with a grizzly," he joked weakly. "Which I guess I sort of did." Hannah's expression darkened. "I gathered as much from the bits and pieces you mumbled while I was patching you up. Something about Grant Leland, taunting a bear?" Anger flashed through Jacob, chased by a wave of heartsick regret. "It's my fault," he said hollowly. "I'm a park ranger. I knew what Leland was like, but I let him go off into the backcountry anyway. And when he provoked that bear, I just reacted. Jumped in like a damn fool, trying to protect him." Hannah laid a gentle hand on his uninjured arm. "You're no fool, Ranger?" "Jacob," he supplied. "Jacob Wilson." "Ranger Wilson," she continued. "What you did was incredibly brave. Reckless, maybe, but brave. You put your life on the line to save someone, even someone who didn't deserve it. That's the mark of a true guardian." Jacob looked away, shame burning his cheeks. "Some guardian I am. I failed. And now, because of me, Leland's out there thinking he can get away with anything. That there are no consequences to his actions." Hannah's eyes flashed with determination. "Then we'll just have to show him otherwise, won't we?" Jacob met her gaze, something stirring in his chest. A flicker of hope, of purpose. "We?" She grinned, fierce and bright. "We? You didn't think I was going to let you face this alone, did you? I've spent my life fighting for these wild places, Jacob, and I'll be damned if I let some arrogant tycoon destroy them unchecked." In that moment, a partnership was forged, tempered in the flames of shared conviction. Jacob and Hannah, ranger and biologist, united against a common foe. The road ahead would be long and arduous, fraught with danger and opposition. But together, they would stand tall, guardians of the untamed, champions of the wild. The days passed in a blur of healing and strategizing. As Jacob's wounds began to mend, he and Hannah pored over maps and park regulations, building their case against Grant Leland. They pored through Hannah's extensive research years of meticulously cataloged data on the park's delicate ecosystems, the migratory patterns of its wildlife, the precarious balance that Leland's reckless actions threatened to destroy. Jacob, in turn, documented his own experiences, the the trampled paths and scattered litter left in the wake of Leland's latest adventure, the agitation and avoidance behaviors exhibited by the animals in his presence, the callous disregard for park rules and safety protocols. Together, they painted a damning picture, a portrait of arrogance and entitlement, of a man who saw the wilderness as his personal playground, a force to be conquered rather than respected. But they knew it wouldn't be enough. Leland had money, influence, a team of high-powered lawyers at his beck and call. To take him down, they would need more than just evidence. They would need the support of the community, a groundswell of outrage and demand for justice. And so, as Jacob's strength returned, they began to reach out to fellow rangers and biologists, to environmentalists and conservationists, to the tight-knit network of locals who called the Tetons home. The response was overwhelming. Countless stories poured in, each one a damning indictment of Leland's destructive impact on the land and its inhabitants. Ranchers spoke of their livestock, harassed and scattered by Leland's off-road antics. Hikers shared tales of trails left littered and eroded in his wake. Scientists provided data on declining populations, disrupted habitats, the slow unraveling of delicate ecological webs. Jacob and Hannah found themselves at the center of a growing movement, a community united in its love for the wild and its determination to protect it. From rangers to recluses, biologists to builders, they came together in common cause, bound by a fierce devotion to the untamed beauty of their home. In quiet moments, stolen between strategy sessions and rallies, Jacob found himself drawn to Hannah in ways that went beyond mere partnership. Her passion, her intellect, the fire that burned in her eyes when she spoke of the wild places she loved. It called to something deep within him, kindling a spark he'd thought long extinguished. And when she smiled at him, soft and achingly genuine, he felt something take root in his chest, a seed of possibility, of a future he'd never dared to imagine. But there would be time for that later. For now, they had a battle to wage, a wilderness to defend. Together, they would stand against the tide of greed and ignorance, guardians of the untamed, united in purpose and resolve. The wild called, and they would answer come what may. The sun beat down mercilessly on the makeshift stage, a hastily erected platform in the heart of town. A crowd had gathered, drawn by whispers and rumors, a palpable tension crackling in the air. Jacob stood at the mic, Hannah at his side, their presence a united front against the forces that sought to destroy all they held dear. As he looked out over the sea of faces, ranchers and rangers, biologists and businessmen, locals and lovers of the wild, he felt a swell of emotion threaten to overwhelm him. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice ringing out across the square. "We've gathered here today because our home, our wilderness, is under threat. For too long, men like Grant Leland have treated our sacred lands as their personal playground, wreaking havoc and destruction with no thought for the consequences. But we say no more. We, the people who love and respect these wild places, who understand the delicate balance that sustains them, we will not stand idly by while they are desecrated and destroyed. We demand accountability. We demand justice. We demand change." A cheer went up from the crowd, a roar of agreement and solidarity. Jacob felt Hannah's hand slip into his, her fingers interlacing with his own. In that moment, he drew strength from her touch, from the knowledge that he was not alone in this fight. "We have evidence," Hannah spoke up, her voice clear and unwavering. "Reams of data, eyewitness accounts, irrefutable proof of the damage Leland and his ilk have wrought. And we will use it. We will take this fight to the courts, to the media, to the very halls of power if need be. We will not rest until the Tetons, and all wild places, are protected, preserved, and respected as they deserve." Another cheer, louder this time, a rumble of determination and defiance. In the crowd, Jacob saw faces etched with resolve, the grizzled countenance of a lifelong ranger, the fierce eyes of a young activist, the weathered smile of a rancher who'd spent his life in harmony with the land. This was their army, their community, their fellow guardians of the untamed, and together they would prevail. As the rally ended and the crowd began to disperse, Jacob felt a hand clap his shoulder. He turned to see a familiar face, Tom, his old mentor, the man who'd first inducted him into the ranks of the Rangers. "I'm proud of you, son," Tom said gruffly, eyes suspiciously bright. "You're doing what needs to be done. What we should have done a long time ago." Jacob swallowed past the lump in his throat. "I had help," he said, glancing at Hannah. "I couldn't have done it alone." Tom chuckled. "None of us can, in the end. That's the secret, Jacob. That's what Leland and his kind will never understand. The wild doesn't belong to one man. It belongs to all of us, and it's up to all of us to protect it." With those words ringing in his ears, Jacob turned to Hannah, seeing his own determination mirrored in her eyes. They had a long road ahead of them, a battle that was only just beginning, but they would walk it together, hand in hand, united in their love for the untamed places that called to their souls. In that moment, surrounded by his community, Jacob felt a flicker of hope take root in his heart. They could do this. They would do this. For the wild, for each other, for the generations to come. The guardians of the untamed would not be silenced, and the wilderness would endure wild and free, as it was meant to be. The days turned into weeks as Jacob and Hannah threw themselves into their cause with single-minded focus. They pored over legal documents and scientific studies, rallied support from environmental groups across the nation, spoke to journalists and lawmakers until their voices grew hoarse. And slowly, incrementally, the tide began to turn. It started with small victories, a scathing editorial in the local paper, a segment on the evening news exposing Leland's reckless behavior. Then came the lawsuits, the injunctions, the public outcry growing louder by the day. Leland, for his part, remained defiant, his arrogance unshaken in the face of mounting opposition. He threw his money around like a cudgel, hiring PR firms to spin the narrative, unleashing his lawyers like hawks on any who dared to challenge him. But Jacob and Hannah would not be cowed. They met each attack with unwavering resolve, buoyed by the support of their community, the righteousness of their cause. They were the immovable object to Leland's unstoppable force, and they would not yield. Even in the darkest moments, when the fight seemed all but lost, they found solace in each other. In stolen moments between battles, they would slip away to the wilderness they fought so hard to protect, losing themselves in its untamed beauty. On a moonlit night, sitting beside a crackling campfire, Hannah turned to Jacob, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Do you think we can win this?" she asked softly, giving voice to the fear that haunted them both. Jacob reached for her hand, twining his fingers with hers. "We have to," he said simply. "For this," he gestured to the wilderness around them, the soaring peaks and whispering pines, the vast expanse of untouched land stretching out beneath the stars. Hannah followed his gaze, a smile tugging at her lips. "For this," she echoed, "and for us." In that moment, in the heart of the untamed, something shifted between them, a long unspoken truth taking root, blossoming into magnificent life. Under the endless sky, they came together, all barriers falling away until only love remained, wild and pure and all-consuming. They made love there, in the sanctuary of the wild, the land they fought so fiercely to protect, bearing witness to their union. And in the afterglow, tangled in each other's arms, they knew with bone-deep certainty that they would prevail. For they were the guardians of the untamed, the champions of the wild. And together they were invincible. The final confrontation came on a crisp autumn morning, the aspens ablaze with golden leaves, the air thrumming with tension. In a courtroom packed to the rafters, Jacob and Hannah sat side by side, hands clasped tightly beneath the table. Leland lounged in the defendant's chair, an arrogant smirk playing about his lips. He radiated confidence, secure in his belief that his money and influence would once again see him through. But as the trial unfolded, as witness after witness took the stand to testify to his reckless disregard for the land and its creatures, his smug facade began to crack. Faced with an avalanche of damning evidence, even his high-powered lawyers seemed to falter, their arguments ringing increasingly hollow in the face of the truth. And when the verdict was read guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in a cacophony of cheers and applause. Jacob turned to Hannah, tears streaming down his face, and pulled her into a crushing embrace. They had done it. Against all odds, against the might of money and privilege, they had prevailed. The wilderness would be protected, the untamed places preserved for generations to come. As they emerged from the courthouse, blinking in the brilliant sunlight, they were met with a sea of faces, their community, their fellow guardians, united in triumph and joy. Congratulations rained down upon them, hugs and handshakes and backslaps blurring into a giddy whirl of celebration. But amidst the chaos, Jacob sought out one face in particular. Tom, his mentor, stood at the edge of the crowd, a proud smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You did it, kid," he said, voice gruff with emotion. "You showed them what it means to stand up for what's right, what it means to be a true guardian." Jacob shook his head, tears threatening to spill once more. "We did it," he corrected. "All of us. This victory belongs to everyone who fought for it, everyone who believed in the power of the wild." Tom chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. "Spoken like a true leader. Your father would be proud, Jacob. So proud." At the mention of his father, a legendary ranger in his own right, Jacob felt a bittersweet pang. He wished fiercely that the man could have been here to see this moment, to witness the triumph of the cause he'd dedicated his life to. But as he looked out over the sea of exultant faces, as he felt Hannah's hand slip into his own, Jacob knew that his father's legacy lived on. In him, in Hannah, in every soul gathered here today, the guardians of the untamed, the protectors of the wild. They had won this battle, and though he knew there would be others to come, other fights to be fought and won, Jacob felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. For in this moment, surrounded by his community, his love at his side, he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was exactly where he was meant to be. In the aftermath of their triumph, life slowly began to return to normal, or as normal as it could be, in the wake of such a seismic shift. Leland, stripped of his ill-gotten gains and his undeserved influence, slunk away into ignominious obscurity, a cautionary tale of hubris and greed. The lands he had once despoiled were left to heal, to recover from the scars of his reckless reign. And heal they did, under the watchful eyes and tender care of their guardians. Jacob and Hannah, now partners in every sense of the word, threw themselves into the work of restoration and conservation, pouring their hearts and souls into the wilderness they loved so fiercely. They planted trees and cleared trails, monitored wildlife populations and educated visitors on the importance of responsible stewardship. And as the seasons turned and the years passed, they watched in wonder as the land began to thrive once more, bursting forth with new life and untamed beauty. But even as they rejoiced in the fruits of their labors, they knew that their work was far from done. For the wild was a living, breathing thing, ever-changing and evolving, requiring constant care and vigilance to maintain its delicate balance. And so they persevered, facing each new challenge with the same unwavering resolve that had seen them through their darkest hours. They fought off poachers and developers, battled bureaucracy and indifference, all in the name of the untamed places that held their hearts. Through it all, their love for each other only grew stronger, tempered in the crucible of shared struggle and shared joy. In quiet moments stolen between the demands of their work, they would come together in laughter and passion, their bond unbreakable, their commitment unwavering. And when, on a misty spring morning, Hannah placed Jacob's hand on her belly and whispered the news that would change their lives forever, they wept with joy and wonder, marveling at the miracle of new life taking root. Here in the heart of the wild, they would raise their child here, they vowed, in the embrace of the untamed. They would teach them the ways of the wilderness, the secrets of the land, the sacred duty of guardianship. They would pass on the legacy of the wild, ensuring that it endured long after they were gone. For they were the guardians of the untamed, the keepers of the wild. And though the road ahead would be long and winding, filled with trials and triumphs alike, they would walk it together, hand in hand, hearts beating as one. In the untamed places they called home, beneath the endless sky and amidst the symphony of the wild, they had found their true calling, their deepest purpose, and they would never, ever let it go. The years flowed by like a mountain stream, swift and sparkling, bearing Jacob and Hannah ever onward in their journey as guardians of the wild. Their son, Liam, grew into a strong and curious child, his eyes alight with wonder at the untamed world around him. From his earliest days, he was steeped in the lore of the land, learning at his parents' knees the secrets of the forests and the mountains, the ways of the creatures that called them home. Under the tutelage of his father, he learned to track and to navigate, to read the signs of the wild like a second language. From his mother, he absorbed a deep and abiding love for the intricate dance of the ecosystems, the delicate balance that sustained all life. And as he grew, so too did his understanding of the sacred duty that had been passed down to him, the mantle of guardianship that he would one day take up in his turn. For Jacob and Hannah, watching their son blossom in the embrace of the wild was a joy beyond measure. In his eager questions and boundless enthusiasm, they saw the future taking shape, the legacy of the untamed places secure in the hands of a new generation. But even as they reveled in the triumphs of parenthood, they never lost sight of the greater mission that had brought them together. The fight to protect the wilderness, to preserve its untamed majesty for all the generations to come. They expanded their efforts, forging alliances with like-minded groups across the nation and beyond. They lobbied lawmakers and rallied public support, using their hard-won platform to advocate for the wild places that held their hearts. And slowly, incrementally, they began to see the fruits of their labors take root. New protections were put in place, new reserves established, new corridors of wilderness safeguarded from the encroachment of civilization. It was a never-ending battle, a constant struggle against the forces of greed and short-sightedness. But for Jacob and Hannah, it was a fight they would gladly wage until their dying breaths. For they knew, with a certainty that transcended words, that the wild was not a luxury, but a necessity. That in its untamed places lay the very soul of the world, the beating heart of all that was good and true and enduring. And as long as they had breath in their bodies and fire in their hearts, they would stand as its guardians, its champions, its fiercest defenders, for the sake of their son, and all the sons and daughters yet to come, for the sake of the land that had claimed them body and soul, for the sake of the wild in all its untamed glory. They were the guardians of the untamed, and they would never, ever back down. The turning point came on a crisp autumn day, the air thrumming with a strange electricity, a sense of destiny hanging heavy in the air. Jacob and Hannah, now seasoned veterans of countless campaigns and hard-fought victories, found themselves standing once more on the steps of the courthouse, a crowd of supporters at their backs, a phalanx of reporters clamoring for their attention. But this time, the fight was different. This time, the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. For months, they had been locked in a brutal battle with a coalition of developers and extractive industries, powerful interests bent on gutting the very laws and protections they had worked so hard to put in place. Vast swaths of wilderness, once thought secure, now hung in the balance, their fate to be decided by the stroke of a pen. It had been a grueling campaign, a war of attrition that had tested their resolve to its very limits. Late nights spent poring over legal briefs, endless rounds of negotiations and public hearings, a constant barrage of attacks and counterattacks in the press. But now, in this moment, all of that faded away. Now, there was only the verdict, the final judgment that would determine the fate of the wild for generations to come. As the judge took the bench, Jacob reached for Hannah's hand, feeling the familiar calluses of a lifetime spent in service to the land. In her touch, he found strength, found courage, found the unshakable conviction that had brought them to this moment. And when the verdict was read, a resounding victory for the forces of conservation, a death knell for the short-sighted greed that threatened to consume the wild, Jacob felt a wave of emotion crash over him, a release of tension so profound that it left him weak in the knees. Beside him, Hannah wept with joy, her face radiant with triumph and relief. In the crowd, their son Liam cheered with the fervor of youth, his voice joining the swelling chorus of celebration. It was a moment Jacob knew he would remember for the rest of his days. A moment of validation, of vindication, of hard-fought victory snatched from the very jaws of defeat. But even as he savored the sweetness of triumph, Jacob knew that their work was far from over. For the wild was a living, breathing thing, ever in need of protection and care. And as long as there were those who sought to despoil and destroy it, the guardians of the untamed would never rest. But for now, in this shining moment, Jacob allowed himself to hope, to believe that the tide was turning, that the hearts and minds of the people were awakening to the priceless value of the untamed places that sustain us all. And as he looked out over the sea of exultant faces, as he felt the love and gratitude of a community united in common cause, Jacob knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had found his true calling, his deepest purpose. He was a guardian of the untamed, a champion of the wild, and he would fight for it now and forever with every ounce of strength and conviction he possessed. For the sake of the land and all who call it home, for the sake of the wild in all its untamed glory, he would never, ever let it go. Years passed, as years are wont to do, and Jacob and Hannah grew old together, their hair graying and their steps slowing, but their love for each other and for the wild never wavering. Under their watchful guidance, a new generation of guardians had risen up, young men and women with fire in their hearts, and a fierce determination to carry on the work that Jacob and Hannah had begun so many years ago. Among them was their own son Liam, now a man grown, with a family of his own and a burning passion for the untamed places that had shaped his soul. In his father's footsteps, he had become a ranger, a protector of the wild, carrying on the legacy of guardianship that ran like a river through his veins. And so, even as Jacob and Hannah began to step back from the fray, secure in the knowledge that the future of the wild was in good hands, they never lost their sense of wonder, their deep and abiding love for the untamed places that had claimed their hearts so long ago. They spent their days in the wilderness they had fought so hard to protect, walking the trails they had trod in their youth, marveling at the resilience and the beauty of the land they called home. And in the evenings, they would sit by the fire, hand in hand, sharing stories and memories, their hearts full to bursting with the joy of a life well lived. One day, as the sun dipped low over the mountains and the shadows grew long, Jacob turned to Hannah, his eyes misty with emotion. "We did it, my love," he said softly, his voice rough with age and remembrance. "We fought the good fight and we won." Hannah smiled, her face lined with the wisdom of the years, her eyes sparkling with the light of 1,000 shared adventures. "We did," she agreed, squeezing his hand. "But the fight is never really over, is it? There will always be those who seek to tame the wild, to bend it to their will." Jacob nodded, his gaze drifting out over the vast expanse of wilderness that stretched before them, the land that had shaped his life and his destiny. "True," he said, "but there will always be those who stand against them, the guardians of the untamed, the protectors of the wild, like Liam and his children, and their children after them." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder, her hair white as snow, her heart as full as the moon. "And so the legacy endures," she murmured. "The wild lives on, untamed and free, as it was always meant to be." And so they sat, the two of them, the guardians of the untamed, the keepers of the wild, watching as the stars wheeled overhead and the night wind whispered through the trees. Two lives, well-lived and deeply loved, forever intertwined with the land they had sworn to protect. In the heart of the wilderness, in the untamed places that called to their souls, they had found their true home, their deepest purpose. And though the years had taken their toll, though the battles had left their scars, they knew that they had lived a life of meaning, a life dedicated to something greater than themselves. For they were the guardians of the untamed, the champions of the wild. And in the untamed places they would always belong. As the embers of the fire burned low and the night wrapped them in its embrace, Jacob and Hannah held each other close, their hearts beating as one, their love a testament to the enduring power of the wild. And in that moment, in the heart of the untamed, they knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, now and forever the guardians of the wild.